Hello again, and welcome to The Theory Creep. I'm The Theory Creep, and this is the YouTube channel that really should have been a podcast. Today, we're live streaming from the MGM Grand Garden Arena, an iconic and very important location for the purposes of this video. Today, we're going to be talking about a personal hero of mine, and I'm really excited to introduce him to you. His name's the Fan Man, and he is a real nexus for a lot of the theoretical work we're going to be doing in this series. We'll come back to him over and over again as we bring up new subjects, but for now, we're just going to introduce him so you know who I'm talking about when I mention the Fan Man in the future. So the Fan Man was an outsider stuntman. He was an extreme pilot. He flew microlight aircraft and fan suits, which are essentially just paragliders. You can see one up there. They're essentially just a paraglider with a fan backpack that the rider wears. The Fan Man is interesting because of what he did with this technology. He was a stuntman, and he inserted himself across the world into spectator events. He landed on the roof of Buckingham Palace. He landed in the middle of a football game. I forget who was playing. And he did this boxing match. I think he also did a soccer game over in the UK when he was over there doing the Buckingham Palace stunt. So the Fan Man was just a normal dude with a real need to be seen. And that's what makes him so interesting to me, is the lengths that he was willing to go in order to be visible. So in every generation, there are moments that stand out, moments that encapsulate the time they occurred in, moments that anticipate the future. The Fan Man's crash landing into the MGM Grand Garden Arena when Riddick Bowe and Evander Holyfield were in the middle of their heavyweight bout. This was definitely one of those moments. It really encapsulates the era of MTV, the war on drugs, the 24-hour news cycle, America's Funniest Home Videos, the birth of reality TV, the beginnings of the internet. The Fan Man really stands for all of this stuff. And in addition to that, he anticipates a lot of the things that came after him. He anticipates the drive for the common person to be seen. He anticipates, I think, the internet in a lot of ways, the way that he functioned in society and within the masses stands for the way that we all have come to function. I believe that the moment the Fan Man landed in the arena will resonate through history. So here he is. This is a picture of the Fan Man seconds after he landed in the ring. As you can see, his parachute cords are tangled in the stage lights around the ring. His boot is caught in the ropes of the ring as the crowd struggles to drag him out of the ring. He probably doesn't want to be there at all. It doesn't look like he's resisting the crowd. It looks like he's just kind of stuck. The eyes of the world are on him. You can see there are several cameras that are filming him and not the fighters who were expected to be in the spotlight for 13 rounds or until one of them lost consciousness. What's really interesting about this picture is that there are no faces in it. It's full of people. From frame to frame, there are human bodies pressed against each other like penguins braced against a storm, but you can't see any faces except for the Fan Man's. This accidentally represents the anonymity of those off stage and the apparent visibility of the people on stage. Now, I say apparent because you probably don't know who the Fan Man is. You might have seen him in cartoons like The Simpsons, or you might have seen him joked about by late-night talk show hosts. But you don't really know who the Fan Man is. You probably never saw him on television. So he's anonymous while being famous. He's extremely visible, but also quite unintelligible. Like anyone worth talking about, the Fan Man was savagely beaten. The crowd went into a frenzy when their blood sport was interrupted, And rightfully so. He was the reason so many nights of revelry were cut short, so many bets would be canceled. The fight itself wouldn't start for another hour or so. The fan man really stole the show. But I think there's more to the crowd's anger than just simple frustration at the cancellation of a spectator event. I think they're reacting to the discursiveness of the fan man, the disruptiveness, the way that he steps out of anonymity and into fame outside of the normal systems that elevate people into fame. The fan man was a rebel. He was an outsider who kicked in the door and stepped into the spotlight without permission. Riderick Bowe and Evander Holyfield were supposed to be in that spotlight, like I said, for 13 rounds or until one of them lost consciousness. They rose from the crowd through progressive, standardized means. Their story is pretty derivative. I'm sure you've heard it before. Athleticism and stick-to-itiveness elevated them from poverty and entered them into the celebrity realm. This progression was sanctioned by the powers that be, the producers, the owners of the leagues, their managers, just the infrastructure of sports entertainment. Baked right into this adulation of the celebrity is this fantasy that the audience that's praising them could, like the celebrity, be lifted up from anonymity into the stage. But the fan man didn't rise from the crowd. He fell from the sky. The space of the stage is sacred. To step onto it requires a ritualized progression that the audience participates in quite heavily. The fan man disrupts this whole process. He deconstructs it. In the picture, he's straddling two worlds. He's not really in either space, the audience or the stage. You could say that the fan man has found a third space between the audience and the stage. He's mostly in the ring, but still partially in the crowd. He's caught in the spotlight, but isn't a recognizable celebrity. He's discovered a kind of liminal, contaminated zone between the two worlds. Again, he's not holding on to the ropes. He's not resisting the crowd. His boot and glove seem to be snagged in the ropes of the ring. Honestly, it looks like he wants to get out of the ring as much as the crowd wants him to leave. This should remind us of Klee's Angel Novus, which we'll throw up right there. Even visually, these two, actually, let's compare the two. These images are even visually quite similar. They both feature a flying figure, distressed, out of control, looking kind of perplexed and confused. Let's return to what Walter Benjamin had to say about Angel Novus, who he called the Angel of History. He said, "The Angel of History must look just so. His face is turned towards the past, where we see the appearance of a chain of events. He sees one single catastrophe, which unceasingly piles rubble on top of rubble and hurls it before his feet. He would like to pause for a moment, to awaken the dead, and to piece together what has been smashed. But a storm is blowing from paradise. It has caught in his wings with such violence that the angel can no longer close them." So Benjamin sees a lot of what we are seeing in the fan man in Angel Novus. Both figures represent a kind of disruption, a kind of destruction instead of development. They challenge the idea of a progressive linear narrative, whether it's historical or in the celebrity world. I think it's safe to say that the same storm that's blowing through the angel's wings tossed the fan man into the ring. We could say that we don't actually see the fan man in this picture, that he's not actually visible. We see his red flight suit, his hiking boots, his giant fan backpack apparatus, the cords of his parachute, but we don't see him. He, his self, isn't visible in this picture. He's reduced to his appearance and in particular to the equipment that he's wearing. His anonymity is a big reason that he was rejected by the crowd. Riderick Bowe and Evander Holyfield were known by the crowd. That's why they weren't ejected. But ironically, it's because they weren't ejected that they became known by the crowd. So there's a kind of a feedback loop that happens here in celebrity culture where you get on stage, you get recognized, and the crowd becomes aware of your existence. And then once they have that awareness, it can increase exponentially. But before you're known, it's seemingly impossible to get known. This is one of the great paradoxes of celebrity culture and micro-celebrities and celebrities in the making. To put it another way, if the Fan Man had been a official extreme sportsman, a legitimate extreme sportsman, maybe he landed a sponsorship deal with Nike, and then he, started working for the LA Raiders, and he'd circle their games with a banner, or maybe he'd throw Gatorade bottles down at the crowd. Maybe then he would have been accepted if he crash landed into the stage of the MGM Garden Arena, because people would know who he was. Maybe it would be viewed as an accident. So the Fan Man defiled rituals of celebrity. He defiled the stage with his profane, anonymous presence. But he also embodies the cult of celebrity in a lot of ways. Celebrities aren't immune to the kind of anonymity that plagues the Fan Man. In fact, they might deal with it more than anyone else. We tend to assume that the process of developing fame is parallel to the process of getting to know the celebrity. As someone becomes more famous, people learn who they are and get to know them through their media presence. But this is a fantasy. It's a useful fantasy for the people who profit off of fame, but in fact, the process of developing fame is quite perpendicular to the process of getting to know the celebrity. What I mean is that celebrities are not seen on stage. We don't know who they are. We know who they're performing to be. And this is true of everyone. Everyone presents a performance of themselves in day-to-day life, but this is especially true of celebrities, where even off stage, their personalities are very scripted and very practiced and very distinct from their private lives. Now, this isn't novel or groundbreaking. I'm not trying to suggest that this should be earth-shattering for you. I think everyone kind of knows somehow that the celebrity's on-stage persona, whether it's on stage in a film or on like a literal stage, or if it's on stage just, in a tabloid magazine on your way to a club or a movie premiere, the celebrity is performing in both environments. But I think most people know that. So if we accept that the celebrity's onstage persona is distinct from their private inner world, then we can see that the Fan Man really embodies the contradictions of being a celebrity. He's seen without being recognized. We don't even really know his name. So if Clee's Angel Novus is actually the angel of history, then maybe the Fan Man is actually the patron saint of the famous. Like all celebrities, he's seen without being known. His visibility makes him invisible. He's at the mercy of a fickle crowd whose adulation can turn to hatred at the drop of a dime, as it can for any proper celebrity. This is another one of those contradictions we're going to be finding over and over again. Even the most innocent and loved celebrity's fan base is a lynch mob in the waiting. Fame has hate and love built into it. Just think about figures like Britney Spears. They inspire, love and like sexual attraction and an idealization from their younger fans. And then they also inspire kind of judgment and hatred and disdain in their older fans or in the parents of their younger fans. Like celebrities have complicated relationships with the masses. They're never just one directional. They can inspire attraction and arousal in one gender and then jealousy in another gender. In this way, celebrities are really avatars of humanity. They're lightning rods for the full spectrum of human emotion. I think this is tied into the fact that they've become a role model for mass self-production or mass self-presentation. Celebrities are uncomplicatedly, unironically, literally modern-day gods. They've taken on the role of the classical god, the polytheistic pantheons of the Greeks and the Norse and the Romans. These casts of characters provided people with archetypes that they could apply to themselves. Today, those archetypes are provided by celebrities. So back in the golden era of Hollywood, stars were selected based on their submissiveness, their attractiveness, and their acting ability, I think in that order. They were selected, from anonymous farming communities and cities around America. And then they were flown to LA, given new identities, new names, trained in new demeanors. They became new people designed to appeal to as large an audience as possible. People designed by marketing executives in studios. Now, we might be tempted to say that these celebrity identities that they're assigned by their producers are somehow less authentic than our own day-to-day identities, but I want you to keep in mind that they're both constructions. It's just one is constructed by you and one was constructed by another group of people. I also think it's important to keep in mind that we're talking about the golden era of Hollywood. Like Judy Garland is an example of this. She was born Frances Ethel Gum. But this is not a discrete moment in Hollywood's history. This is still how the culture industry operates. It's just that today, as individuality has become more fashionable, the process of, making someone into a marketable personality has just become more obfuscated. The fan man is a bridge. He's a connection between anonymity and fame. Now, it's easy to take this dyad between fame and anonymity at face value. It's easy to say that there are those who are famous and those who are anonymous. But as we've seen, the famous embody anonymity quite intensely. So, do the anonymous embody fame? I think so. If you look at how audiences practice rituals of fame and how people who aren't famous fantasize and work towards becoming famous. Just look at shows like American Idol or America's Got Talent or whatever, shows like that. These people who are anonymous certainly seem to be more passionate about becoming famous than people who are already famous, but this probably goes without saying. I think, for example, someone who has their meal in front of them is going to be thinking about their next meal a lot less than someone who hasn't eaten in days. Audiences also drive celebrity culture in a non-trivial way. If we didn't have mass audiences, things like theater or music would be relegated to cottage industries. Just think about traveling bards in the Middle Ages. They didn't have a mass audience, and that's what they were reduced to. So celebrities need audiences. Audiences facilitate celebrities. So this dyad of famous and anonymous is really not simple. There's a lot of integration and a lot of contamination between the two poles. And the fan man embodies that contamination and a kind of third space where these two areas mix. Peter Sellers is another really good example of this mixing of anonymity and fame. Through his celebrity, through his roles in film, Peter Sellers completely lost touch with whatever self he had before that process of fame began. His family often commented that he completely embodied the characters he was performing as. He would come home from set, and if he was Inspector Clouseau that day on set, he was Inspector Clouseau with his children. And if he was Dr. Strangelove that day on set, he was Dr. Strangelove in bed with his wife that night. Let's talk about Judy Garland again, also known as Frances Ethel Gum. Like I said, she was picked out of Idaho or Nebraska or some fucking dustbin state, flown to LA, given a new name, and presented to the audience as a new person. But I think it's important to keep in mind that MGM isn't the CIA. Judy Garland didn't go into witness protection. Her fans knew that she was born Frances Ethel Gum. Her plain appearance and her early life as a kind of anonymous regular person facilitated her fans' fantasy that one day they too, as a regular anonymous person, could be lifted up onto the stage. Garland is an icon for the American dream, this fantasy of being lifted up from anonymity or lifting yourself up through anonymity and becoming famous and, again, living this opulent, ideal American life. So we might not all dream of being famous actors, but we definitely all dream of being acknowledged and recognized and seen. These are universal human needs that are embodied in extremis in the celebrity. Roland Barthes has a really nice essay on celebrity identity formation and celebrity audience relationships, and in it he focuses on wrestlers. It's called The World of Wrestling. So for Barthes, wrestling is all about superficiality. It's all about gesture and appearance. It's all about visibility, maximizing visibility. And for him, he characterizes all of these traits with the term intelligibility. So let's use that word. He says, the wrestler casts to the public eye the magical entertainment of a temperament which finds its natural expression in a gesture. Gestures and appearances are all celebrities, especially wrestlers, are. They're reduced to their outermost layer by their performance. Barth says that they're emptied out of interiority to the benefit of exterior signs. And this superficiality, again, is to the benefit of intelligibility. The idea is that it amplifies visibility. It amplifies meaning. See, we tend to have this assumption in Western culture that meaning is interior. It's hidden inside of things, that we have to decode the world in order to understand it. But here in The Wrestler, Barthes is showing us that we can see things and that visibility can offer us meaning. So the wrestler becomes more meaningful as they become more visible. They project their meaning out into the crowd. The wrestler is an icon. They're a cave painting or a cartoon. They're a simple caricature. And that facilitates intelligibility, to use Barth's term, and also kind of mass connection. The simpler something is, the more people can connect with it. The more they can project themselves and their own experiences onto what they're seeing. The wrestler is also a fantasy. They're distinct. It's very obvious where they begin and the ring ends, where their opponent begins and they end. The barriers between the wrestler's self and the world around them are very firm. This isn't true of our day-to-day selves. We probably wish it was. We probably wish that as we walked through the world, ourselves were distinct and knowable, and the world wasn't constantly piercing us and influencing us, and we tend to feel like we don't have a lot of agency in our day-to-day lives. We tend to feel like the world is forcing us in one direction and we would rather go in another. This isn't true of the wrestler. The wrestler has his script, he follows it, he seems like a distinct agent with his own agenda. Again, it's a fantasy. We don't live that way, but the wrestler seems to, and I think that facilitates the crowd's engagement with wrestling and makes the wrestler seem like a more appealing figure. Wrestlers are people. They have four limbs, 2 arms, 2 legs, 1 head, 2 eyes. They're a human. We don't feel like humans. I don't know about you guys, but as I move through life, I often feel like a snail. I'm smearing this residue all over my world. Like, it's very hard for me to distinguish where I am and where the world is, where these barriers begin. We're in my room, and common sense tells us that I am in my body and my room is distinct from me. But I've been here for 6 years modifying this space, fine-tuning it. It's really become an expression of who I am. This is, to some extent, an interior space for me. When I'm in it, I feel like my body might not really be as distinct from the world around it. I doubt wrestlers have that experience of the world. So I don't know where I end and where the world begins. And what about the other? What about other people? Are they under their skin? Are they in there? Are they their skin? I don't know. It's hard to say. Are they their secrets? What about my secrets? Are they a part of me, even though I don't show them to people? Are the other secrets a part of them, even though they keep them hidden from me? Again, these aren't questions that wrestler characters or celebrities ask themselves. They live in a world of certainty with firm barriers between themselves and the other. Or at least that's how they appear to live. They're objects. They're reduced to their appearance, to their materiality. They're commodities. They're products for sale. And the same thing separates a commodity from just a piece of matter that separates a wrestler from a pile of bones and organs. And that thing is intelligibility. The wrestler and the commodity are intelligible. But this video isn't about wrestling, it's about boxing. And Barthes mentions boxing at the beginning of his essay, and this might be one of the few points where I disagree with him. He says that boxing and wrestling are distinct. He says that boxing is real and that wrestling is performed. He says that you can bet on a boxing match. And what he's implying there is that it's a fair sport as opposed to performance. Now, obviously, in some ways, he's right, but I think that he's doing himself a disservice. He's elevating boxing and he's supplicating wrestling. He's making wrestling lesser than boxing because it's not as real. The truth is that boxers are every bit as intelligible, to use his term, as wrestlers are. Boxers are reduced to their skin just as much as wrestlers, if not more so, because, like Francis Ethel Gum, boxers have this real person history built into them. People who respect boxers know who they were before they were famous. It's part of their story. This is another one of those divisions that we want to complicate. Barthes is saying that boxing is serious and legitimate, and that wrestling is not serious and performed. Barthes is saying that performative things are not authentic, and that authentic things are not performative. I think that those dyads, those pairs contaminate each other more than Barthes is admitting in this essay. The iconification of the wrestler isn't unique to performances. It happens whenever people are seen. I think that we can also see these trends of reduction to superficiality in our day-to-day experiences. Someone doesn't have to be on a screen for you to see them and reduce them to their appearance. Now, for the sake of fairness, we should mention that there are some pretty significant differences between audience relationships in boxing and audience relationships in wrestling. The most significant, I think, is fairness. Boxing fans expect a fair fight. There's a referee in the ring. Their word is law. The boxers are expected to obey the rules within reason, whereas in wrestling, there's a referee, but he's really just another character in the show. The rules in a wrestling match are meant to be broken. There's also a difference in terms of how these sports represent suffering. Boxing represents very real, very profound suffering. People go to hospitals after boxing matches all the time. The same is true of wrestling. People get very seriously injured in wrestling, but the injuries are performative. It's not one person hurting another person. It's two people doing very dangerous gymnastics together that often result in broken bones or concussions or cuts or that kind of thing. Two wrestlers help each other in the ring. They lift each other up so they can do more dramatic falls, whereas two boxers, they're like caged dogs. They're in there to hurt each other. That's the whole point of the spectacle. Also, we should talk about intelligibility in these two sports. Boxing is not particularly intelligible. It's hard to understand what's going on in a boxing match. The characters in a boxing match are intelligible because they're seen, they're reduced, they're celebrities. We've already talked about that. But the actual gesture, to use another Barthian term, in the gestures in a boxing match are inscrutable. They're subtle, they're hard to follow. A subtle change in stance, hands up, hands down, southpaw, etc. These things really change the dynamics of a fight, and they're very subtle maneuvers. They're meant to be hard to see because they're supposed to confuse your opponent. Wrestling, on the other hand, the gestures have to be overt. They have to be very intelligible for safety reasons because your opponent has to see what you're doing. Wrestlers will also often whisper what they're about to do to each other, so there's no surprises between the two performers. And the gestures have to be intelligible to the audience. They have to be these big, super visible gestures. So intelligibility between boxing and wrestling is in some ways similar in that the characters are both intelligible, but it's also distinct in that the gestures in the two sports are different. All right, so it's a little late in the video, but we're going to introduce the cultural theorist of the week. This time it's going to be Chris Hedges, who I guess is like a cultural critic, a journalist, I think is where he comes from. Anyway, his book Empire of Illusion is disturbing and depressing. Very, very cynical assessment of America in the late 2000s. He has a chapter on wrestling, and I'd like to read from it for a second. We'll throw the quote up here. It'll probably have to be in 2 parts. It's quite long. Hedges says, "The matches are always acts of retribution for a host of elaborate and fictional wrongs. The narratives of emotional wreckage reflected in the wrestler's state. The narratives of emotional wreckage reflected in the wrestlers' stage biographies mirror the emotional wreckage of the fans. This is the deep appeal of professional wrestling. It is the appeal of much of popular culture, from Jerry Springer to reality television to Oprah Winfrey. The narratives expose the anxiety that we will die and never be recognized or acclaimed, that we will never be wealthy, that we are not among the chosen, but remain among the vast anonymous masses. The ringside sagas are designed to reassure us. They hold out the hope that we, humble and unsung as these celebrities once were, will eventually be blessed with grace and fortune." So in this instance, Hedges and I are just in complete agreement, which is pretty rare. Usually he is pretty platonic and conservative and against virtual or imagined spaces. But in this instance, he's just talking about what it is that celebrity culture and wrestling matches in particular offer their audiences, and that is the fantasy that they will also be famous one day. You watch someone who's famous, who wasn't famous all the time, who wasn't always famous, and you imagine that one day you'll be just like them. Now, there's one instance here that we should talk about. It's his use of reality television, the way that he puts reality in quotation marks. He's obviously implying that reality television isn't real. Again, another dyad that we will be deconstructing. Right now, let's just agree with Hedges. Let's just use him as an example of a very well-written description of celebrity identification and celebrity fantasies by audiences. But just keep in mind that Hedges isn't 100% a friend of this channel. A lot of his beliefs are very platonic, and we'll be going toe-to-toe with him in the future. Everything wants an audience. Birds of paradise have been putting on performances for thousands of years. It's not just humans that need to be seen. I think that any mammalian, reptilian, avian, whatever you call a fish, organism, I think they need recognition. We need to know that there's another and that the other can see us. It's important for our sense of belonging and our sense of value in the world. These stories are very old in human culture as well. In Homer's The Iliad, Achilles is a kind of ancient celebrity. He sacrificed his long, anonymous life for a short, glorious life as a battle hero figure. Now, Homer characterizes the dangers of Achilles' decision as being physical. He's living a more perilous life. He's more likely to die young in battle. But what if the perils that Achilles was facing were more along the lines that a wrestler or a boxer were facing? What if it was Achilles' identity that was under threat instead of his physical well-being? So Achilles is beefing with some Greek king. I think it was Agamemnon, and he's not going to go in and fight in the next battle in the Trojan War. His buddy, Patroclus, tries to convince Achilles to fight, fails to, and ends up stealing Achilles' armor, dresses up himself as Achilles, and goes into battle on his own, pretending to be Achilles. Now, what's interesting about this is no one on the battlefield is able to tell the difference between Patroclus and Achilles, because there may not be a difference between Patroclus and Achilles in that moment, because Patroclus is appearing to be Achilles. To the audience, to the soldiers around him, Patroclus is Achilles. And Achilles, because he's this celebrity figure of the ancient world, has been reduced to gesture. He's been hollowed out of interiority, to use Barth's terms, so he's replaceable. He's a commodity. He is his appearance, and Patroclus becomes him on the battlefield. Achilles has become his appearance. And is he lonely? Has that made Achilles lonely? Probably. It probably has. He doesn't have a self to connect with other people anymore. He just has his visibility. But I don't think he's any more lonely than the anonymous soldiers who mistake Patroclus for Achilles on the battlefield, which is to say, I think that everyone experiences this kind of misidentification. Everyone on some level knows that the relationships they have with other people, digital or in the material world, they're not based on authentic selfhood. They're not based on a real connection. They're based on performance, and they're based on mitigation. So if there is no interior world to share with people, or the interior world that we experience is unshareable with people, then all we have is our cladding. All we have is this armor, this appearance, this veneer that sits on our surface. So of course we maintain it neurotically. We're like a bird pruning its feathers, or a cat grooming itself. All we can do is maintain this shell, because if it chips away, there's nothing underneath. And if the measure of this veneer, if the thing that we evaluate our appearance based on is visibility and maximizing visibility, then of course celebrities are the optimal role model for modern forms of self-manufacturing, self-identification, self-presentation. Because we all want to be seen, and no one is more seen than a celebrity. So I hope that helps explain why we're talking about celebrities the way that we are, why they're such a big part of a series on self-manufacturing on the internet. That's going to wrap it up for this video. I'm sorry, it probably went on for a little longer than I wanted it to, but I'm super stoked about the Fan Man. He's super cool. There's lots of stuff that he makes me think about. And like I said, he's going to come up again and again as this project progresses. Thanks for joining us. The next video in this series is going to be on Goffman Irving and Walter Benjamin. and their approaches to self-presentation and celebrity. Although I may not do that video right away, I might do a standalone video, or maybe I'll start the other series that I want to do in this channel, which is murder and other humane acts. Anyway, thanks for joining us. This has been The Theory Creep. I'm The Theory Creep, and hope to see you next time.